Hello and welcome to episode 243 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar Orti. Lovely to have you here. Thank you for coming back if you are a regular listener. If you have recently joined us, or even if this is your first episode, welcome. I am delighted to have you here today because this is a solo show. So my name is Pilar Orti. I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, which is the company behind this show. And in Virtual Not Distant, we help managers and their teams transition to an office optional approach, which of course has been interesting recently, but hopefully I think this is going to be the way forward. So I'd like to think that we've been thinking about it for long enough to be able to help. We do consultancy, we do coaching, we do workshops, and we are soon going to launch an in-house podcasting service for organizations. But anyway, I might tell you a little bit more about that later on. Today, it's the third episode in an unofficial season around visible teamwork. So it's going to be a solo show. I'm going to look at motivation and visible teamwork. And after this show, we're going to go back to our fortnightly schedule. So next week we'll have a show, but then after that we're going to go into a fortnightly schedule again. So yes, I hope you enjoy that. So visible teamwork is a way of looking at how we organize ourselves as a team and as managers, how we lead teams in a different way to when we are co-located, as in the office together all the time. And it's about using technology in a way that helps us to know what we're working on, but also that helps us to stay connected as team members in all sorts of different ways. And visible teamwork is a set of practices, and I've been looking at how they relate to trust. So there's a past episode around that. We also looked at task interdependence. So how are our tasks arranged in our team, as in how we are dependent to and from each other, and how that relates to how we adopt visible teamwork practices. And today we're going to look at motivation, which is actually the first thing that I looked at when I came up with these concepts. Is before we decide how we're going to communicate, how we're going to encourage our team members to communicate with each other, and how we as managers are going to be involved in teamwork online, we need to go back to basics. And that is motivation. What is it that drives us intrinsically? I'm not going to look at extrinsic motivation. I'm going to look at the kind of motivation that comes from within. And I love the Deci and Ryan self-determination theory because it assumes that everybody wants to do their best, but the environment gets in the way. So there are things that we can do that will increase our motivation, that will increase other people's motivation. And there are things that we can do that actually decrease it. But I really like that because it comes from the positive psychology movement or era even, that it assumes that we want to do our best at work. I think that's quite a nice and healthy place to start with. So, yes, the theory says that as long as we assume that we are autonomous, competent, and that relate to others, then we'll want to do our best. And I think that's quite important, is the sense of perception, because it will change, which is where we must know our team members well and ourselves. So I'll just go very briefly over the three areas of visible teamwork, which are deliberate communication, which are about unearthing and making deliberate everything we need to know about each other as a person. That's going to allow us to work better together. And these are things like what mood, our availability, our context. Then a work visibility, which is what do we need to know about each other's work? That's going to help us work together better. And that's about having open conversations, sharing open thoughts, open learning, and also workflow visibility and even visible work. And finally, planned spontaneity, which is about having systems, procedures, tools that allow us to have random encounters, or if we can't make those encounters random, then at least have random conversations, where the virtual coffee is the most obvious one. So deliberate communication, work visibility, and planned spontaneity. So let's put those to one side at the moment, and let's have a look at autonomy, which is one of these three components of motivation as defined by Deci and Ryan. And by the way, brackets, if you are interested in this, have a read of Daniel Pink's Drive, because he's based that book around that. He uses different terms. He uses mastery instead of competence, and purpose instead of relatedness. But I've decided to stick to relatedness rather than purpose, because sometimes we relate to people, but not to purpose. And I think that's very important, especially in all kinds of teams and organizations, but especially when we're going away from each other. Sometimes it's the people we miss. The work is okay, but actually our sense of connection is with the people. So that's worth remembering. So if we're looking at autonomy, we know if we can choose where we work from, that gives us a sense of autonomy that might get us motivated and keep us even loyal to the employer. However, now we have, we've always had this issue, but I think we're going to have it even more now, is organizations, larger ones on the whole, big generalization, are probably going to have some sort of hybrid setup, sometimes we're in the office, sometimes not. Some people are in the office, some people aren't. And this has always been there, but now I think it might be even more apparent that what we don't want is to create an environment where some people have more autonomy or feel like they have more autonomy about how they do their work than others. So it's really important then to remember that remote work is part of a flexible setup. So if some of our people can choose where they work from and others can't, where is the autonomy for the people that can't choose where they work from? Is there a flexibility in schedule? Is there flexibility in the tasks they do? Is there autonomy in how they do those tasks? A lot of the time, let's face it, there is more than one way of doing something. And if we can choose how we do it, that gives us a sense of autonomy. Can they choose who they work with? So really, this is about looking at work in the organization as a whole and finding where are the bits that people can choose. I'll leave it there. So when we are going back to visible teamwork, deliberate communication, which is about communicating information about ourselves as individuals that people will miss because we're not together in the same place, deliberate communication can give us autonomy, because it says, look, this is what I'm doing, this is how I am at the moment, and I am telling you this is where I'm at, and now I can go off and do my thing because I've given you the information that you need. And similarly, when I'm thinking about how I'm going to interact with you, if I have information about you, your availability, your context, etc., it gives me a little bit more autonomy to choose how I interact with you. So that is the thinking behind how visible teamwork can help with autonomy. Of course, there's more, because if we know what other people are working on, or if we can see the workflow, we can choose when to do our tasks as well. So for example, if I can see you're going to work on something tomorrow, then I might decide to choose to wait until you finish that, until I start mine. On the other hand, some of you are probably thinking, well, actually, sometimes that might decrease my autonomy because I have to slot in because we've decided to work in a certain way. And that is something that we need to be aware of, especially if we start to introduce practices where we have to do a lot of reporting back or where we have to use lots of new pieces of technology. That's going to decrease our sense of autonomy because maybe we don't want to work in that way. Or we are used to working with one tool, and now because we've agreed in the team or because that's the tool we have access to, we have to work with another tool. So there's always going to be one for the other. We need to be aware of it, and when possible, talk with the team and and explain what the choices are. And that's why the team agreement, some shape or form of communication charter, is really important. Don't leave it to chance. All right, let's move on. I could talk all day, especially when we're looking at autonomy. So the next bit of motivation that we're looking at is competence. And this is the sense that we are doing our job well or that we're learning on the job. I think it's really interesting to remember both of those things. And for some knowledge workers, what they really need is time to focus on a task. And that's where asynchronous communication comes in. And this is communication that we have with each other, not in real time. And why can that help me to feel competent? Because it gives me the time to really get my teeth into a piece of work without interruptions. That is still the benefit of working away from each other, of choosing the environment we can work in, is that we can find the time to really concentrate on our work. So asynchronous communication with a good team agreement around it can give us that. So that could be something we do for competence. On the flip side, if we are trying to do our work, but we can't get hold of anyone, then that's going to make us feel less competent. So that's why it's very important to know that availability in advance as much as possible so that we can plan our work. When we start to work in this way, when we haven't been rushed into it, when we start to work in this way, it feels like, well, there is a lot of adapting to do, and we have to think through. If you think of the ladder of learning, please correct me with the proper term about it, which is first, it's like when you drive a car. When you first drive a car, you have to think through everything as you do it. And only at one point you get to just go. It's very similar with team communication. You've got to think at the beginning through everything. Oh, was I supposed to do this, that, etc. And then at some point, as we design and correct and flex it, then it becomes part of how we work. So this is a change program. This is really important to remember, is that normally when we go into an office optional approach into incorporating online collaboration practices, we treat it as a change program. Productivity does go down a bit because we're doing something different and we're learning on the job. So that means we're not as great. However, at some point it picks up. And if we are designing carefully and if we're reviewing, then we work better. We come out better at the other end. Learning as part of competence, it's really important that that doesn't disappear when we're working away from each other. And this is something that if you do have an office optional approach, then maybe being together in the space is an opportunity for learning together. But also remember to have ways in which to share what you're learning as individuals and formalize it. So instead of saying, oh, whenever you've learned something, put it down in Slack. No, okay, we've got a Slack channel, and every other Wednesday we go in there and we write at least a couple of sentences about something we've learned. That has a couple of benefits. One is you share that learning, which might be, of course, of use to other people, but also it makes sure that people stop, reflect, and think through how they're doing their work and then communicate that learning. So it's got that double. And it sends a big message that actually we're learning all the time, that reflective practice is a good thing. It helps us to think through what we're doing. And also, of course, the sharing aspect. It can help us to stay connected, which takes me into relatedness. So I'm really whizzing through this because there's so much to say. We could spend, there's an idea for when we go back to another weekly. We could spend a whole episode on each of these. So relatedness is about feeling like we connect with other people or with the organization or with the purpose of the organization. So this is quite one to hang on to if we are in a managerial position or if we are the kind of team member that usually works across the organization. When we start to work in a location-independent way or with flexible schedules even, we might start to lose information about the company. So we might still be very connected to the team, but at an organizational level, we stop getting those bits of informal information that we would get if we were going into the same office as everyone else all the time. Managers are perfectly placed to be bringing back that kind of information into the team. But again, if we don't make the space for it, if we don't design for it, then we will lose it. So that can be part of our open conversations as a manager, is every now and then come back and report back to the team. You can do an audio piece because this might be information that doesn't need to be looked through or documented. So you might every 2 weeks or after every meeting that you've got or after every communication that you have with another department, then do an audio piece to share with the team or dictate into a document or type a document or do a diagram, whatever you think might help. But it's important to get into the habit of doing that or have a set process. The other thing to bear in mind is that some time ago, I think it's like 5 or 6 years ago now, when Sandy Penland and his team at MIT looked at the communication patterns of high-performance teams, one of the things they found was that high-performance teams were communicating outside of their team very often. So they were either going through periods where they were communicating a lot in their team or a lot with outside people, and that was our communication pattern. So maybe that's something you can build also into your communication, into your visible teamwork practices, which is every 3 weeks, we, if not regularly, but every X amount of time, we bring into the team something that we've heard from the outside, or even more deliberately, every 2 weeks, we will have a conversation with someone in another team, and we will talk about X, Y, Z. Some organizations have pairing up systems like Trello, which they automate usually, which will pair up people in different teams or in other parts of the organization. Pair them up, just say, look, over the next 2 weeks, find a time to have a half an hour coffee. And you could do that at that level. If you're not doing that as an organization, which will probably not happen as much in hybrid, in office optional setups, as in distributed, fully distributed, if your organization doesn't have that, do that in the team. Don't forget that it's not just about keeping your team visible. It's also about staying connected to the purpose and the organization. This visible team, keeping your team visible, I usually, sometimes I forget about it, but that's also part of visible teamwork. And again, you have to design for it in your team. Then going back to relatedness, we can also be relating at a personal level, which is why planned spontaneity is so important, to constantly be bumping into people, design your virtual coffees, have your random channels, etc., and build some of that into open conversations also. When you're, as a manager, especially when you're communicating, when you're dropping a message for the team or for an individual, how can you make it a little bit richer in what it says about you? So it's worth thinking about that all the time. And is there anything personable? It doesn't have to be something private. It can be something personal. I don't know. Are there certain words that you always say when you speak? Can you put that in your writing with your team? So it's about finding points of connection. And that's where I'm going to leave it now. I'm going to say that if you want to know more, then get in touch. My email is pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. Visible teamwork, it's really about thinking about how we structure our communication. And again, we've got deliberate communication, work visibility, and planned spontaneity. And we've always got to see how introducing this is affecting our autonomy, our sense of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So you can do an exercise in your team looking at this. You can bring us in, virtualnotdistant.com, to facilitate some of these conversations online. Or when eventually we go back into the space, there will also be that possibility. But we can do that definitely online. And also, if you need help with that transition, or if you need a sounding board as a manager, we are here for you as well for that. Plus, talking about relatedness, well, we're launching soon the in-house podcasting for connection, which is a way of helping the larger organizations especially to have a different point of connection away from the screens for our people. How can we hear the voices from the organization while we're away from each other? Well, podcasting is one way. We have a newsletter, virtualnotdistant.com, and I think that's where I'm going to leave it now. Thank you very much. We will be going back to our fortnightly, every 2 weeks schedule soon. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.